It's also the
No
most
alpacas, though, right?
no alpacas. It's also the most valuable crop per pound I've ever grown.
See?
It's celery root seed.
Mhm.
Yeah, $3,700 a pound.
Oof.
Okay.
All right. Let's bring 2022-23 Yamhill County Budget Board back in session.
Okay, so for the next part of the deliberations, I prepared, there's a spreadsheet that I placed at everyone's workstation this morning and also sent it to Doreen as well. And it's just a tracking worksheet as we go through the list. So you're going to see during the last 2 days of presentations, we tried to keep track of all the various requests that have come forward. So you have the categories up above, you have the departmental requests, the funding requests, and we'll be looking at going through each of those items. Then there's the community requests, which is that second section, and that was the request that we received either via email or Monday evening at the hearing. And then you have the personnel requests listed before. For the department and community requests, when you're looking at the spreadsheet, you're going to see a first column that is going to highlight the amount that's being requested. If it's a general fund request, you'll see that it's noted in the second. The third is if it's a non-general fund, if it's not an allocation increase, we call it other, or a lot of times we'll do that with one-time increases as well, although some of those you could approve it for general fund monies to be approved there. And then the rest of this is what I use to track the deliberations and the actions taken on each of the requests. The other thing I would call out is you will have columns on the various categories. So once it's approved, you have general fund, landfill license reserve, ONC reserve, video lottery, and contingency. Those are the basic categories of funds that we have available that are discretionary in nature. So anything that's approved, you can see that there's balances down below. The one thing I would call out is the $102,000 for the video lottery for whatever reason. Today seems to be the day of typos. So the actual amount that's available is video lottery. It's $358,350, and that's just what's in the ending balance for Fund 26. So I'm going to track this and go along. So depending on the action taken on the request, if it's approved, then we'll have to determine, if it's an allocation increase, that's pretty straightforward. That's general fund. So if, as an example, the first one on the list is the request from the district attorney's office. And so as an example, if approved, that 192,000 would then come out of the general fund. So then that would take that 2.6 million down to 2.5 million. If approved. So that's how we're tracking it. I have a spreadsheet that I'll be updating those numbers. So if there's questions about what's been approved to this point and how much is still available in those funds, just let me know and I can provide an updated number. But on that, I hand it back to the chair.
All right, so we're just gonna go through these in order. Is that
That sounds good to me,
what
Chair.
you would?
And it looks like the beginning is the district attorneys, and I have a question for Brad, Chair, if that's okay to bring
Absolutely,
him forward. That would be great. I mean, I think that's for the microphone. I can hear you, but Doreen might not be able to.
Yeah, and so just to clarify for those who may be watching the meeting as well, the first request is a general fund allocation increase for the district attorney's office to restore a DDA position and support staff position that was cut in order to balance the budget.
Perfect. And thank you, Ken. And I should have asked you this question yesterday. I asked a lot of other ones, but I didn't ask this one, which is, do you, it looks from your second request, like it's one support staff to one DDA. Do you need more staff than support staff than that per DDA, or is that the ideal formula?
We don't have one-to-one.
Okay.
Because we have staff that are doing other tasks than supporting an attorney. So I know I have at least 3 staff who support 2 attorneys each. And how we assign those is in part dependent on the size of the caseload. So for example, I mentioned the misdemeanor deputies. They all have really heavy caseloads, but the misdemeanor deputies are kind of off the charts heavy. They each have their own support person, but then I have other support staff who are supporting. I have one staff who's supporting both of the lawyers I have doing DV work. And then I have one staff person who's primarily responsible for importing all of our intake and assigning cases, but she also supports an attorney. So they have other tasks that they do.
Great, that's super helpful. I wanted to make sure we were giving you or prepared to consider the right formula.
Yeah, and just so that you know, I know we need at least these numbers. It kind of is a 1B to your question. But I'm not prepared to say that if we had additional staffing and we make, I'm always making organizational changes to make it work best. And now we have these other things that we're having to pay attention to also. But I wouldn't come in and say, give me 2 when I'm not sure that 1 won't suffice.
Sure.
So this is a kind of a 1 step at a time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, so we have a request for general fund allocation increase to restore 1 DDA and 1 support staff of $192,011.
Chair, I would recommend that we approve the general fund allocation increase for the 1 DDA and 1 support staff as a starting point. And maybe we can talk about the next one.
I'd second that.
All right, any discussion? No discussion? So we have a motion and a second, so we can take a vote, is that correct? All right, all in favor of increasing the general fund allocation to $192,000 and $192,011 for the district attorney? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Motion passes. All right. We have a second general fund request for general fund allocation increase for district attorney to add an EDA and support staff of $215,184.
I will say that,
Oh. Nope, never mind.
okay, that sounds great. The Board of Commissioners has heard from our district attorney. I want to say many times, it's probably not many times, from the beginning of the pandemic until now, that we were going to have higher caseloads as we were leaving the acute phase of the pandemic. What it looks like is this is the, hey, we're leaving the acute phase. So it makes sense to me that this would come before us now, and it makes sense to me to fund it.
I agree.
But it looks like Commissioner, I was going to make a motion, but I wanted to make sure that there were thoughts before.
What I was gonna say was, we didn't really, did we have a discussion about the general fund versus other? I mean, obviously, when it comes to staff, I would wanna focus that one there, but
With these being ongoing, positions that will be for at least a number of years, the recommendation was based upon it being a general fund increase. With some of the others where it's a one time, that I think we can discuss where some of these other places, but I wouldn't be comfortable taking it from the ONC reserve for a staff position.
yeah.
All right, I move that we approve the general fund allocation of $215,184 for the additional DDA and support staff.
I second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the general fund allocation increase of $215,184 for the additional DDA and support staff, district attorney, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, none opposed.
So I guess my only question is so you have space issues, right? You've been dealing with that for,
And we talked about that.
Mhm.
So in part, what I mentioned, the refurnishing for my support staff, we will add stations. So
Okay.
that's taken care of. And I have one vacant office from Deborah Bridges' department. She
Oh, right.
had an office.
Okay.
So we'll be at capacity on part of it, but we'll actually have it, the new station setup should allow a seating space for volunteers that work with the admin staff and lawyers. We're okay for that section of our staff.
okay. And the discretionary we gave last year for furniture, that should cover it. Seems like
And
you're good
I
there.
really hope to know by now, but
Okay.
I'm not going to spend over that. So
Yep.
we have to figure out some other way we'll do that.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right. Next on our list is Health and Human Services for Veteran Services, the general fund allocation increase of $97,928.
Chair, Ken, I have a couple of questions about the HHS requests, and unless you can answer them, or do we wait for?
I can try.
Okay.
But Lindsay's going to be on her way. She's in another meeting that she wants to get wrapped up and head this way. So I can take an attempt.
Okay,
Or
So-
do we? Oh,
we
sorry.
could put them at the end, or I could just see if maybe they're pretty general questions. Okay, so in terms of, we know we have some significant issues with being able to deal with capacity, at least what I've heard lately. So I'm wondering where this funding typically, and why this would be a general fund request.
Because Veteran Services Offices is a general fund supported program. It's not Medicaid. It's not other programs. There are some additional revenues that come in, I believe, from the state, but it's a general fund revenue that supports this.
I understand that part,
Yeah.
but in terms of the supports from the state, where does that fit in terms of being able to help support this position?
I would say most of it is going to be general fund. In fact, you may remember if you go back, you look at HHS, with the size of the budget, it's pretty small as far as the general fund allocation. And some of that general fund allocation is specific. Veterans is one of those programs where it's a general fund program. In fact, it used to be a general fund program until it was moved to HHS and moved under HHS. So there's not the Medicaid fund or some of the other programs that HHS has that are feeding into this. This is strictly general fund.
Okay, and I just have some questions about the actual request. I'm looking for it here and I'm not seeing it. I'm on table C.
So the memo, it looks like, talks about how, the amount that the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs has sent to us has been staying steady, but cost drivers such as the CBA have made the total budget of the department higher. And so over time, our contribution to maintaining the same office has gone up, or, that percentage has shifted. And I think it's a question then for us of, it truly is one of those policy. Do we want to keep the Veteran Service Office essentially operating as it has been?
Okay, well, the other question I have regarding the suicide prevention position, I was asking because I remember that there was someone in that position who's now in another position. So my question is this is funding for part of that position, and it's being funded elsewhere as well, correct?
That's a question Lindsay's going to have to get into those details.
Okay,
I think
my
it was a
understanding is a
0.5.
0.5.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, maybe we can have these just for clarification at the end. So when she gets here, we can ask for a little bit of clarification on these two positions. Because I have some questions about alternative funding possibilities, but that would be a question for her. So maybe we can move 3 and 4 down.
Yeah, Chair, I would also like to have a discussion about the ARPA allocations in relation to some of those requests as well. So,
All right, then we will move 3 and 4 down into 14 and 15.
We actually won't have to move those. We can just skip them, table them, and we'll come back to them.
Okay. Then
Chair, if you want, I could just read it, make a motion on this next one.
Sure.
Rather than you read it and then me making a motion for it.
there we go.
Okay, I would move that we do a general fund allocation, approve a general fund allocation increase for a desktop support specialist, and in the amount of $79,243. And as a reminder, this person's currently at a flat $30,000 extra help, or maybe it's even less than that. But
Except for it's not this person. This is
yes, that's
adding a
right. This is
position that
adding a
would be subject
position.
to a recruitment process.
that's right. Thank you. That's right. It's doing similar things, right?
Yes.
But we don't have enough time.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right, we have a motion.
Yeah, we have. the
I moved
motion.
that we approve the
Looking
general
for a
fund
second.
allocation request.
Second.
Second. All right. Further discussion. All right, all in support of a general fund allocation of $79,243 for desktop support specialists, say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, motion passes. Next is parks. We have a request for $100,000 for one-time funding of a open parks and open space master plan.
And Chair, I wanted to, question I was going to ask Ken was, is this an appropriate use of video lottery dollars? Since we're directing money to parks from video lottery, and this seems like a, or is this
I was
too
gonna say ARPA.
peripheral? Okay,
Well, I didn't build an ARPA. There's no
Right.
ARPA
Right.
fund category in here because the
Mhm.
funds, and the part that I should clarify is under general fund, the amount that's available is the ARPA funds that are being transferred specifically to 1002. So it's included in that
it's
total amount.
included in that.
Nothing on here is an approval of direct allocation out of ARPA because that's Fund 32. And so that's why that's not included in here because of the mechanisms for the transfer. So any ARPA related funds is going to be part of that $2 million that's in the general fund that's identified here. So yeah, as far as this specific one, I was going to recommend landfill license reserve or O&C
Okay.
are two of the categories that we've typically used for this type of one-time funding request. So, sorry.
So you're saying the ARPA funds are in the 2.607 number?
Correct.
Okay, so this is why I kind of wanted to take a step back and look at ARPA and who chose where the money should go, where, where's the accounting of it between public health response and then the revenue loss. Because I think I need to have a fuller picture of that and where the money is intended to go and what it's intended to do before we look at it, because they just kind of showed up as line items in the budget. I don't know that we had a policy discussion about that, so.
We did, because the one thing that I would call out is the information that I provided in my budget message that outlined the percentages that were discussed was a policy discussion or several work sessions that we had with the Board of Commissioners where we identified the various categories. And then I took those amounts like the public health response and the revenue replacements and everything that's built into those budgets is within those guidelines is moving those funds to where we had identified in areas. So as an example, the public health response, the two main projects that we had built into the budget or what we were proposing was a transfer to capital improvement for public health investments for capital improvement. And then the second part was for $1 million for the ERP project, which is our central finance system project. And then the rest of the revenue replacement, there were direct allocations proposed to HHS, to the fairgrounds, and then to 1002, the general fund. And that is part of what you have available in the 2.6 million in that bucket, in addition to what funds were already distributed out to all the departments as part of the discretionary allocation.
Okay, I don't remember voting on that. Maybe we did, and I'm just.
We had the discussion. I'm not sure if it, I don't remember if it was a vote, but it was a direction to staff.
Okay. So there were other departments, though, that came forward with potential ARPA requests. So I guess that's my question is why are we only choosing basically public health and the ERP project?
That's not just what we're choosing because of the revenue loss, right? So the revenue loss money is in that bottom line, right? So for example, if we approve the sheriffs, then that'll be part of the ARPA.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
We could say that part of it is actually what we already approved for the DA.
Correct.
And realistically, some of
It is.
It's very reasonable to make the argument even because
It is. Yeah.
this is the backlog of cases due to COVID.
Right.
Okay, can we take a step back? The public health response is $3.120 some million, right? What projects are we spending that money on?
Here's a handout that breaks this. I'll just have it and I just need a moment before I talk about it.
I think from what I remember, we were talking about some pretty high ticket items in terms of these two projects, these two allocations, and that's why we made the decision to earmark that in public health.
Right.
Because they were significant.
I remember that discussion. I don't remember us approving of 1.3 million of revenue loss going to HHS. Maybe I just am not remembering, but I don't remember that.
Well, again, we had that identified as the categories for revenue loss. And then as part of building the budget and determining on how we're going to apply that, that's what was built into Fund 32. And that's the proposal, is to move 1.3 million to HHS as revenue replacement and 260,000 for the fairgrounds. And for the remainder of the funds available to go to 1002.
Goes to the general fund.
Correct.
Okay, so if revenue loss, a sizable chunk is going to HHS, $1.3 million, why could that not cover some of their needs in their general fund requests for personnel?
So I guess a way to look at this is that HHS is accepting based upon our priorities a $1.3 million allocation from American Rescue Plan for revenue loss. So that means they have a budget, and because of a loss of income due to COVID and pandemic, then they have to make that, they need to make that up in order to continue the services that they provide to the community. And because these are the proposed increases in positions are not ones that we're getting fee for service for. So we're not getting funded through Medicaid or Medicare or the state. If we prioritize and value it, then we can choose to fund it through general fund.
Just in time.
I think so, because we're asking questions about HHS. And so Commissioner Starrett, maybe Commissioner Coolbet, are you saying that the HHS budget, county side of the budget, has been balanced with this $1.3 million?
Yes, that's what the purpose of the revenue loss is.
Okay, so going forward, we may have a bigger problem.
Or what? I'm missing a preposition, sorry.
We've got several things we're talking about right
okay.
now.
So Director Manfred, it sounds like the question is that was directed was, there's 1.3 million that was directed to HHS as part of the revenue loss component
Yes.
of the American Rescue Plan money. And the question was, is that not sufficient to fund the Veteran Service Office completely and the suicide prevention position?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. So I mean, certainly financially, right, the numbers would shake out, but the problem is that those things are both ongoing costs, whereas the $1.3 million of revenue loss replacement through the ARPA funds are one-time funds. So that means that when we're adding a position or we're adding staffing, we're trying to absorb the costs of the veterans program that have been increasing substantially through things like our collective bargaining agreement and things like that, where we didn't get any additional county general fund and we don't get any additional state funds. We continue to just lose money, and we still have to maintain the same level of programming is the issue. So it's hard to take one-time funds and use for things like staffing. Usually when we see one-time funds and things of that nature, right, they're used for investment in capital or things like that. I'm not sure if that helps.
So, okay, so when the proposal came forward about HHS revenue loss, what was shown that constitutes $1.3 million.
Yeah, so our variable revenue is what was at a 50% reduction. And that 50% reduction of variable revenue is $1.3 million. And so what falls into the 1.3, or excuse me, what falls into variable revenue are things that we're billing open card for, we're billing private insurance for, we're billing things that don't fall under our CCO global budget and aren't paid for through, state dollars that cover something like our, I'm trying to think of a good example, our IDD program, our developmental disabilities program, right? We get state funding that allows us to pay our staff and those costs that go along with that. So things that fall outside of the CCO global budget, those types of state dollars and things that we're billing for on a fee for service basis. So person comes in, gets a service, we bill the insurance or things like that. That's where we saw a substantial amount of revenue loss. Now, our costs, of course, did not go down, right? Because those staff were still employed. We were still providing service. The service just looked different. So rather than having those individuals that were coming in for groups or things like that, because many people were quite honestly kind of lost to care in a number of ways because they weren't sure what to do. So what our staff were doing was a lot of direct outreach, making calls, sometimes being in the field, trying to connect with individuals who we used to see regularly and we were no longer seeing. They were no longer coming in and we were still there for them, but either they didn't know it or maybe they were apprehensive of coming into service or things like that. And so the staff costs didn't change. The revenue changed because what we were doing was still important work and still needed to be done, but wasn't reimbursable. We can't bill, Blue Cross for that, for example. And so that's where that $1.3 million, that 50% of variable revenue came from, and that's where that was lost.
Okay, so I'm assuming 1.3 makes you whole in a sense for.
It covers those variable revenue costs, yes.
Okay,
that were lost.
Is there a concern going forward that our variable revenue will be different?
I don't think so. All signs are indicating that things are beginning to ease. We're beginning to see more and more people coming back to care. We're seeing those shifts. And that's something we're watching very closely, right? We get frequent reports just around our variable revenue. So my anticipation is no, that should level off now that things are settling and going back to a pre-COVID, pre-pandemic state.
Okay. I have a question about the, so the ODVA gives us about a third of what we're using or what we're doing right now in Veterans Affairs. So this additional 97,000, when you talk about needing it to sustain the program, can you be more specific about what we would be looking at for that? And would that be going forward what we'd need from the general fund every year around that, another $100,000?
So yes and yes. So what that means is to sustain the program is to maintain those staffing levels. I mean, that our costs have just gone up substantially, right? I mean, through the last collective bargaining agreement, our costs went up 18%, but we didn't receive any additional funding for that. And so we had to absorb that. And we were able to use some of our fund balance, our reserves to pay for that. But it gets really hard to do that year over year because those reserves continue to be depleted. Additionally, much of our reserves tend to be things that fall into buckets like medically necessary care for Medicaid, and we can't use those funds to pay for veterans services. It's just not an allowable expense through Medicaid law. And so that's the challenge, that's the issue. The state funding is not going up, the county costs are going up.
So in your conversations with other counties, other people in your position, are they just not delivering those services? Are they just saying, look, this is what we get, and sorry, we can't do any more than that?
I think most veteran services don't fall within the Health and Human Services department in counties. So I don't have a lot of great contacts in terms of being able to understand how their programs are functioning. But my suspicions would be a couple of things. One, either there's more county general fund that are making those programs sustainable, or they're providing less service.
And are they then basically saying to ODVA or referring people to ODVA saying, go there and figure it out?
I couldn't really speak to that. I mean, I think that could be a possibility. It could just be that they have long wait lists. It could be that they don't do things like drive to Sheridan if someone needs them to get their paperwork helped and they don't have transportation or ability to get to us. So we do provide, a high level of care to individuals. So I can't say for certain, but that would be my guess. I
Okay.
mean, that's how I would have to look at it, right? If I
Okay.
were-
And the other question I had to do with the request for the new FTE for the suicide prevention. So the current makeup of that position right now, because I know that we did have an individual who was doing that because they were working with us in the suicide prevention work I'm doing, and then they weren't there anymore. And I think it was because they were sort of redeployed somewhere else regarding COVID. But in terms of how that exists now, what is the current makeup of that?
Yeah. So currently we have enough funding that, well, we've had some funding that's come through that we've used for some of the things that I think you might be mentioning in terms of trying to do some community education around mental health first aid, providing some training in some cases and things like that. So it's been pretty limited to those types of things. And we had a position that is actually our alcohol and drug prevention coordinator just absorb some of that work. And so it was never a standalone position. It was absorbed within that work and just was sadly one of those things of when I have time, I'm able to address some of these things and working hard to try to do things like mental health first aid trainings when they could fit it into their schedule. And so if we look at carving out some of those dollars that we've historically used for mental health first aid, for example, and looking at those things, we think that we know based on our analysis, we could carve out roughly 0.5 of an FTE. And we know two things. One is recruiting for a 0.5 FTE will probably not be successful. And we certainly know there's more than one full-time position's worth of work, unfortunately, in this area. So the things that we'd be able to do that we haven't historically been able to do is do a work within our school systems that we haven't historically done. Being able to work with organizations like the Veterans Firearm Suicide Prevention group that's working throughout Oregon that we've not been able to tap into, and really do more active outreach to the community, but also really implement some of the things that we know are actual evidence-based models that we know can help reduce suicide in our community, and wanting to have the capacity to be able to do that.
And one more question, if I can monopolize the conversation here. So I noticed that at one point you talked about increasing the number of trainings. Are those covered through any other funding, or is that coming from the county?
Trainings, could you be more specific?
I
about what
think you're
kind?
talking about the staff trainings, types of trainings that you do in-house or
Oh, sure.
bring people in.
Yeah, well, so depending on the type of training, sometimes we're able to use our CCO dollars or things like that, especially if they're trainings that are required under our contract, either through OHA or CCO. So I think it really largely depends on what type of training, but mainly that is not always something that we're using. I wouldn't say that generally is county general fund. Typically, we're using things like our pay for performance CCO dollars, which are those dollars we get when the CCO meets their OHA metrics, and our CCO has done that every year that they've been around, which is great. And then as the behavioral health organization, we receive a percentage of those, and often those are what we're using to reinvest in things like staff development.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thanks for the questions. I didn't have to answer them.
Thank you. Thanks for coming back.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anything
Thank
else?
you.
Don't go too far.
Yeah.
There might be more.
I'll sit around for a little bit. Thank you.
And Ken, where's the 1.3 reflected in the HHS budget again?
I think that would be a Lindsay question, not that you have your budget in front of you.
Hold on, I don't know if I can pull that.
I was looking.
in a capital expenditure line, and I think that's where it coincides with my.
Well, there's the public health capital line, right?
Mhm.
But that's where it is both of them, the. Because there's the 2.2 that's in a capital line, but then there's the 1.3 that would be revenue loss, and I'd be surprised if that was in the capital line.
Right.
But you do have a beginning balance in 16,001.
Yeah, so the transfer coming into HHS is 1690, 380.91 is where the actual transfers coming in. And then it's really up to the department on how they're, because again, it's revenue replacement. So there's really no limitations on what the department budgets those funds for, but it does look like that it is in a reserve for the future for 99003. The numbers match. So
Okay, so it's being put into a reserve fund? Sorry.
There's a book back there that has the whole,
yeah.
is that you?
there,
Okay.
So-
Yeah, I see it.
So part of some of the conversations that we've had with county administration around some of these funds have been related to some of the desperate needs that we have within our public health building. As you know, it's literally
Mhm.
falling down from the outside, the stucco falls off, and we've gone days without power. We have to have staff plug in laptops on the side of the wall so that they can continue working. And it was so. This was this opportunity, and as Ken and I have discussed, using that for reserve, knowing that we're going to need to put some investment.
Right.
Hopefully not necessarily in that specific building, because I think as the space and needs has told us, that's probably not a wise investment, but
Yeah.
looking at some other way to make sure that we have those needs met.
Yeah, we're really not looking to necessarily make the investments into improving that building, but it's part, because again, like I was saying before, because there is the additional funds that we're moving directly to Fund 40 for future capital improvement as well. And we specifically said for public health is one of the categories. But again, through the capital planning process and right now the cost estimate that was presented to us, if we implemented the full range of that plan, it's right around 300 million to implement the space needs. But I'm not trying to necessarily start reserving $300 million in this budget because we can't do that. But at the same time, we need to have sufficient funds so we can start implementing portions of that plan to work towards that direction. And one of the bigger priorities, is the fact that we have here at the campus area, our largest department, HHS, is spread out all over the place in buildings in various states. Everything from historic houses to buildings that I would like to get out of and make available if someone else wants to come and see it as an investment, to leases and everything else. So that's why really looking at, even though I know we still have work to do with the board as far as the long-term actually adopting the plan and figuring out the next steps, I want to make sure we have at least some funds available to start working and implementing those plans, because we're struggling right now with our current space needs.
And I think it's really challenging for us to find other funding sources for anything that's related to capital, because we can't, the majority of our budget is Medicaid dollars, and we can't use that for that sort of investment or that sort of thing. And so it's unusual for us to come across an opportunity where we're able to actually invest funds into something like that.
And I think a really good example is one of the things that Director Manfred and I have been talking about, not that, is the one-stop shop
Absolutely.
concept as well, is the other project that includes public health and some other program areas, and being able to have some funds to leverage that would align with our long-term planning for facilities, but then it could be something that could be done at a faster timeline. So making sure that we have sufficient funds to make that kind of investment is going to be critical.
So I'm seeing two different line items. One is for HHS Public Health Building, 2.12 million
Mhm.
for that sort of savings account. And then I'm seeing 1.3 for the revenue loss. But in the budget, it's showing that the 1.3 is going into a reserve for the future.
Mhm.
So where
Yeah.
is that reconciling? Because if you're down 1.3 million and it's supposed to be going towards revenue loss, where does that reconcile?
So I'm just doing math in my head, and I think what's happening is I think there's a combination of two things that are in that. You said 2.2,
2.12.
2.212. I think that includes the 1.3 million is,
No,
no, it doesn't.
that's
Okay.
two different
Yeah, they're two different things.
things. The 1.3 million is going directly into Fund 16 that's going into the reserve for the future,
Okay.
straight into HHS.
Yeah.
That budget. The 2.1 million is going into capital reserve, which is Fund 40.
Mhm.
We have that identified for possible public health, but there's nothing to say that that doesn't get used for another portion of a capital project. Or it was just originally, the intent was for public health, that we thought the more immediate need is addressing public health and some of the projects there. So whether it's a labeling issue or something that we need to have a discussion on, but really that 2.1 million is going to Fund 40 capital reserve.
specifically
Right.
for it. And then the 1.3 is, I mean, a way to think about it too is we as a county are employing these staff, but for a time period, we weren't able to bill anybody. And typically that billing, in the case of the 1.3, was for money that is essentially, it's once it comes into the county, once it comes into HHS, it's just like coming into a doctor's office. They can spend it to repair the roof, or they can spend it to fund the position that did the work, right? So it's once it comes in and it's 1.3, it's essentially the equivalent of that billed fee for service that you could then use to build out the office, or you can use to fund a staff member, all the support. Sorry.
We do have a few more rules and regs because we're so highly funded through Medicaid than perhaps a private doctor's office. But I think the concept is, typically that comes in for us when we are doing that fee for service billing. Those funds do come in and broadly speaking are what help support paying for the staff that are doing that work in general. And then we have this separate thing that occurred with the revenue loss and the ARPA funds. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'm not. So I'm trying to see where the revenue loss is reflected in the current budget. And if it is, where is the 1.3 reflected in the current budget as a backfill?
So the revenue loss wouldn't be reflected in this upcoming budget because the revenue loss occurred in the previous budget. And actually occurred, Ken, I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the exact dates that they were looking at, but.
Right. There was a specific date frame. You're not, it's not, this 1.3 million is not coming into Fund 16 in order for Fund 16 to balance. This was treated as revenue replacement based on previous years because the time frame actually crossed over a couple of fiscal years. And so when you're looking at that time frame, we still, subject to Oregon budget law, have to present and run a balanced budget. And so if you look at it, certainly we were having to eat into reserves. We were having to look at some of those other funding resources for a short-term fix and this is intended to replenish that, because whether or not all of those funds could have been used to backfill in that case, is a question mark.
So the loss is reflected in previous budgets
Right.
when we were lost in just trying to supplement where we could through various things.
Okay, I apologize for the inquisition, but I just want to make sure, because the three of us are the ones that get the questions of where did you spend the ARPA dollars? So I want to make sure it's really clear that, we have a paper trail that shows that we are backfilling 1.3 million from public health.
Yeah, absolutely understand, certainly. And I know that there's been several reports that Ken's had to send off to account for that revenue loss and how it was calculated and all of those things as well.
Right.
Yeah. Anybody else have questions?
And then I just wanted to note, because there really is an ask that we make a policy decision right now, which is on the suicide prevention program, as I see it, right? Because we have, in the past, commissioners said we want to fund the Veteran Service Office, and we've continued to do that. Maybe you were even part of the initiation of that.
It wasn't part of HHS.
At the time.
Right.
Or
It was a very long time ago.
Right. But I will say that I appreciate having them connected. Hopefully you do.
There's definitely a lot of value in having a connection.
given to you. And I see the suicide prevention program as a similar thing, where the proposal is to us is, do we want to have a suicide prevention program that isn't funded by an outside entity, but is instead funded by our own tax dollars? I don't know if that's helpful to you. It was helpful to me to think about it that way.
I do have a question about the HHS budget, but this is probably more for Ken in the organizational nature of it. So most of the other funds, they'll start with beginning balances at the beginning of each section of a budget. And the HHS one has a beginning balance of 10,617,478. And I presume that covers all of the categories of HHS. But is there a reference anywhere for the starting balances of each section? And I guess more specifically, I'm wondering, is there any beginning balance for veterans in particular?
I don't think that was presented to you in that level of detail, but it is something that we could get.
I mean, it is something that we do factor in, and HHS is not the only one. Fund 21, Community Corrections is another one, Fund 80, Insurance Reserve. We do have several funds that we don't necessarily post beginning balances or do that determination. We're required to balance to the fund. And so that's why a lot of times you'll see that we'll take those beginning balances and it'll be for the fund. But again, we still have to do calculations when determining that, that each department, and I know Lindsay and her team were doing the same thing, that they would go through each expenditure line in each division to come up with that roll-up number that's ultimately that beginning balance for the entire fund. But I don't know if Lindsay has that information readily available to answer a question on what the beginning balance. I mean, because the Veteran Services is also located in the DB account as well. So
That one's a little harder to parcel out, and that's just a historic carryover from the way that it was put into the budget originally. And at some point, it would be wise to be able to parcel that out, and it just has not happened yet. It might be easier with our new system, perhaps.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thanks, Ryan.
So,
And-
oh, yeah. Go ahead. I've been monopolizing.
I just got one. I want to understand these. I mean, I'm not new to this, but you guys deal with this every day. So I'm just trying to process through the conversation with Commissioner Bershaw. So there was a loss of income in the past, and I'm trying to liken this to my business. So I run a business. We have a tough time. I go draw on a credit line and we make it through. And then the next year I get some money. I got to go pay that credit line back off, but it appears we're getting $1.3 million and we don't have to pay anything off. So somehow we made it through that rough patch and we're still balancing a budget, but we get $1.3 million for a loss that we don't have to pay back. And then we've got a need to fund a couple of positions that we don't want to use the money we just got, but we're putting it for the future. Is that
Yeah.
making sense?
Yes.
Like
think so.
why, if we don't have to pay it off, why don't we just use it right now if you've got it to fund
Those
a couple
positions.
positions?
So the biggest challenge with that is these are one-time funds. And so they're not going to support the position over time. And they also are, there are some time limits related to some of them, depending on how you categorize the ARPA funds and things like that. And so utilizing one-time funds to fulfill staff positions is generally not something we do because we're just getting them the one time. And my hope, right, is that we continue to support the Veteran Services team ongoing, and that if it's decided and we are able to pursue and have a full-time suicide prevention, that it wouldn't be a time limited position, as much as any of our funding is through the legislative process, but that it would be a position that continues on and carries forward and isn't thought of as just one that we can use these one-time funds for, that it would be ongoing. Excuse me. Does that help?
Or the other thing, the other approach that I would take to it is, in order for us to kind of navigate the need, this is the reason why we have reserves. We try to budget reserves. And if we end up in a situation where we have to spend into, where we have expenses or revenues are down and we're having to spend into those reserves, we have an obligation to prepare for the next time to make sure that we're replenishing those reserves as well. So that's another way to look at this, except for what we have some outstanding needs when it comes to capital improvement. And that's why we've really tried to target these funds. Instead of just replenishing reserves, we want to bring these funds and have them identified for future capital needs as well. So we were able to utilize reserves, and that's how we've been able to operate when the revenues have been down, or if we have a glitch there, because we can't just stop delivering the services, for our programs. So when we have that, we have to get into the reserves, and then hopefully in this case, we're replenishing these reserves, but instead of just putting it back into a reserve account, we're identifying it for more of an investment into capital needs that we need to do. It's the other approach that I would throw in there as well.
Okay, so essentially, when Chair Denny was referring to drawing on a line of credit and then having to repay it, the way that HHS navigated the loss at the time was to hit the reserves.
Mhm.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay.
So then basically using this 1.3 for capital improvement doesn't replenish the reserves.
It wouldn't, if that is the way, if those funds are, if we move forward with a capital project, you're correct.
Currently, it's in, as the budget stands now, it is in a reserve line.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly, but so I guess that comes to the question of, in terms of replenishing, if it wasn't replenishing, if it went into capital reserve, where's the replenishing?
Well, it's there. We just identified it for a different need. And if the need arose
really
during the
shouldn't.
next
take it
fiscal
out.
We
year,
just say, we can't do a
we
capital.
would take it,
We're
we wouldn't do the capital
Yeah.
project, and we would need those funds to make sure that we can continue to deliver on services.
And
So
Oh, I think you had something you wanted to say, but I
Oh,
wanted
I
to
was just
you
gonna
too.
ask, how does that mesh with the ARPA restrictions? Because originally we had, you have to spend it within a certain
Mhm.
time, and
it's a
Is-
revenue replacement.
so
It's-
that falls
it's-
under the $10 million umbrella.
It falls under the $10 million umbrella. And while I'm, like I mentioned before, that we're still trying to, I built the budget based on the priorities on the work sessions that we had on how we're spending these funds. But really by identifying it as revenue replacement, a lot of those timelines and restrictions and other elements do come off.
And there's no restriction on where you can park it.
We still have to be able to, it doesn't have the same level of restrictions or the limitations on the amount of use because we're using it for revenue replacement. We can use it for general government services. We can use it for a lot of the categories under ARPA, but I wouldn't say that
We
the
can't build a
restrictions.
dam and we can't pay off retirement.
We can't use it
obligations.
for, well, like as an example, they're specific, we can't use it towards a retirement reserve or a pension.
So I wanted to, because
So-
we were talking about reserves, I think this is a good opportunity to go to, and I apologize that it didn't read it. This is the purpose of doing this multiple times, is I didn't read as closely the first 3 times, the Veterans Service Office request. And what I saw in it is that over the past couple of years, the HHS discretionary budget, so the money that they're allowed, that you have the ability to move around and not just restrict to one use, has been used to backfill the Veterans Service Office to maintain the same level of operations. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely accurate.
Okay.
That we've had to do that, especially again, after that last CBA, when we really didn't get additional money from allocated to us through discretionary. And we find so much value, of course, in the 4% of our budget that is community or county general fund. And yet our costs going back into the county supersede that amount in many ways, right? Like the amount of money that comes to us as a percentage each year, we actually spend more paying into things for the county. Right, and I'm not arguing whether we should or shouldn't. It's just, it's a reality check though on the funding coming into us and what that money actually goes towards.
And that went from 4% to 25% of your discretionary funds or county discretionary funds.
Say that one more time.
In
Which
other
part?
words,
Oh.
for veterans, your
Correct.
support
Yes.
went. So really, if we want to look forward and every successive CBA puts us further and further behind, at some point, I like to say Atlas will shrug. And at what point is this unsustainable? And I mean, not just your department, but everybody's. I mean, at some point, it's becoming, a heavy lift.
It absolutely is. And, I recognize that with inflation being at 8 or 9%, we have employees that can't pay for gas to get to work. We have employees that struggle to pay their bills. And so it's a challenging situation to find ourselves in. And yet, I wouldn't necessarily say that I was 100% supportive of those CBA changes, even though it was, over $4 million that I had to find in my budget essentially. And that was hard. And that was a little scary, to be honest, when it happened, of how we were going to do that. And I'm very supportive because I want to make sure that our employees are able to pay for gas to come to work, to pay for service, the things that they need for their family and things like that. But you're absolutely right those are always the questions that when folks like you all are having to make those really hard decisions, whether it's through this budget process or through things like our collective bargaining agreements. And I know you've got many of those that are always something happening with one of them. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I guess the way that I'm seeing it with the Veteran Service Office is that we've agreed as a budget committee in the past. I wasn't here, but I've supported it, is to use general fund dollars to direct to Health and Human Services to operate this office. The costs have gone up. And so over time, as is listed in the context section, additional funds on top of what we're annually already agreed to has had to be added to it. And I will say that I think it's an important thing for me, at least, to recognize that the Board of Commissioners and the Budget Committee are saying to Health and Human Services, we want you to do this. And Health and Human Services, in order to keep the consistent service levels, has put their own money into it rather than general fund dollars. That's just how I'm seeing it, is that I want to respect that we're still saying we want HHS to do this, and we should probably be willing to fund it for that.
But you've also used general fund dollars.
We've used some of
From
our
your
discretionary.
in other words, your share of general fund dollars.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Chair, if I might,
Yes.
can we get a quick update on, so the general fund 2.607, you said that's partly ARPA.
Mhm.
Can you break that out for us in terms of how much of that is ARPA? Because we've approved,
If you go to my budget message, there was the slide where I talked about the discretionary allocation. There was a specific slide that actually broke that out on what's property tax, what's tobacco, what's alcohol, and there was ARPA that was included in there.
Alcohol, tobacco, and ARPA.
Yeah.
On page 6, is that the one you're talking about on page 6 for that diagram?
It's,
no,
Yeah. I'm thinking about the dollars.
that's the chart. There should be a table.
This the one?
Yes.
Oh, this is a separate.
Yeah, there was, it's in the budget message.
Oh, yeah.
You want my scribbles? You can look at them.
No, I got it.
There's profanity on there.
No, we got it.
So there was a summary that was in the budget message that looks just like this, that had a generalized breakdown of the revenue. So you'll see that there's a beginning balance of 4.4 million. You have the current year taxes are being estimated at coming in almost 26 million. We had 400,000 in prior year taxes and so on. And then when you get down to ARPA, you'll see, and I get that this can get confusing, but you'll see that there's 4.4 million. And the reason there's 4.4 million coming into transfer, that's going to include the 3.1 million for the public health response and the 1.3 million that was for the general fund, Because those funds, in order for us to transfer it out to the departments, it's a budgetary function. It's gonna come out of Fund 32, go into 1002, and then get transferred out to Fund 40. Yeah, Fund 40 is where I think the primary transfers are coming out of 1002. Does that make sense?
No, because this says 4.420. And I'm seeing more than that going to, well, actually, yeah, more than that.
There, I may have missed a transfer.
Okay, so the 4.420 is the public health response chunk. And then the 1.3 million for HHS revenue loss. But then we're seeing,
No. Not in that 4.4, because that 1.3 is going straight to Fund 16, not via.
okay,
It never goes into the general fund.
right, but I'm looking at the table. The table for ARPA, and it says general fund 1002, 1.352409.
Mhm.
So is,
That's included in that 4 million.
okay. I'm just, at the end of it, I'm trying to get to how much of the general fund amount on our deliberation list of that 2,607,309 is ARPA funds, one-time ARPA funds?
Well, it doesn't
don't know.
really work that way. As far as what's in that ending balance is what you're going to see is all the numbers here. You have the $36 million, and then you go to the discretionary allocation table where we have the set discretionary allocation that's going out to all departments, and whatever's left out of that 36 million, which could be ARPA, it could be, there's not an exact formula. We don't distribute the funds because it's all the revenues are put together, and it's treated that full $36 million is available for all the general fund departments and all the transfers that happen and all the funds that come out. The 2 million, 2.2 million that is on the deliberation sheet is what is left of what we're projecting of that $36 million that we're going to have next fiscal year.
Where's 2.2?
I'm sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth between, these are multiple spreadsheets. I'm sorry, the 2.6 million that's on the sheet that we have available on the deliberation.
Is ARPA?
No,
I'm
No.
sorry, I'm,
it's
not
what's left of the 36
Yeah.
million of 1002.
What's remainder?
We've distributed
250.
out the way the budget's currently built and the discretionary allocation table as it's built. We have transferred out almost $34 million to all the other departments. What's remained, and I'm just rounding numbers, it's not exact. So what we have left is the $2.6 million that's on the deliberation sheet, because that is in a reserve for the future and ending balance. Of course, I'm going to recommend that we don't distribute all $2.6 million because that's a reserve and we're going to need it for next year. But I don't have a set number to say you can reserve up to a certain amount, but I'm just saying that's the 2.6 million is what's left of the 36 million in 1002.
okay, so if you account for 4.420438 ARPA, we get to 2.6 million roughly. Because that's been accounted for in whatever.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
so it
That's
doesn't have
included,
ARPA.
that's
Okay.
budgeted in 1002 as a revenue that those funds are coming in.
Okay. So is it correct to say that so far we have approved roughly $500,000 in general fund discretionary money?
We have actually, at this point where we're at in the process, as part of this budget that has been built. Let me just a moment here. So the budget, there has been I want to be careful about throwing out so much numbers because I'm not able to actually sit and do the calculations. So based on what's been approved, we've approved all but that 2.6 million, but then with the DA's requests that were just approved. Jump back. I have too many spreadsheets open right now. And the IT request, there's been $407,000. That's why I said the 2.2 million. So $407,000, just over $407,000 have already been approved on the first general fund request. And so we have $2.2 million remaining in general fund at a 1002 that's available for distribution.
And we've approved EA and IT.
Correct.
Okay, so we're taking that off of the 2.6 essentially.
Correct.
Okay.
Because those were general fund allocation
yep.
increases.
Or 2.12, I guess it is. 2.12. Oh,
Because I am gonna, once we get further down the list, for some of the one-time requests, I do have some recommendations that I think we should be looking at landfill license reserve and O&C funds for those types of requests. So that way we can preserve more discretionary in the general fund.
I think that makes sense.
so if you go to the ARPA table,
Mhm.
Is it accurate to say that we have transferred into Fund 1002 $1,352,409 that is not dedicated to anything yet?
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct, because the other categories, the other amounts were moved to 1002 as a budgetary function to be able to transfer those to Fund 40.
Okay. Makes sense. I suppose that was a really roundabout way of getting back to the Parks Master Plan that we were previously discussing.
Can Lindsay Manfred go back to work? Or is she going to sit there and just
Politely sit
wait to
here.
be released from this ongoing torture?
Chair, maybe we could, I would be happy to make a motion that we do approve a general fund allocation increase for Health and Human Services for the Veteran Service Program in the amount of $97,920. So I have them on the floor.
Second.
Discussion. All right, all in favor of the general fund allocation of $97,928 for the Veteran Service Program, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, passes.
And then I would move approval of the general fund allocation request, the increase for the HHS suicide prevention position for $61,215.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor of approval of $61,215 in additional general fund allocation for the suicide prevention position, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes.
And thank you all for a robust discussion of that.
Yes.
And thank you for helping us
Yes.
understand it. I appreciate
Thank
it.
And
you.
thank you. I appreciate all your time.
I understand it better now.
Nice
But I
job.
really appreciate the fact that I can leave now.
Stay close to your phone.
All right, so where were we on the parks?
So we were at one-time funding request for Parks and Open Space Master Plan.
Yes.
So Chair, I'm the liaison to the park, so I'm just gonna make a pitch. I am going to suggest that we fund that out of the general fund revenue loss ARPA as a one-time expense. I think that it's been 10+ years since the last time we did a parks master plan. And we've had some significant changes within the department and moving it out of community corrections and over to public works. And what I've noticed on the board is that there's a sense of uncertainty as to what's next in terms of what they're going to focus on, whether we're going to expand county parks, whether we're going to retract them, how we're going to pay for the maintenance. It's kind of all across the board. I think they would appreciate having a plan and some direction to move forward. And like I said, it's been a decade or more since that's been done. So that is my proposal, that we take that $100,000 from the 1.352409 general fund.
And my recommendation, if I could, because you're going to see another agenda item in the Parks Board, and the Parks don't know about this because this is my proposal and there's no memo attached to it. But along those same lines with the operational changes that we have been making and the shifting of responsibilities and with the status of the work group program, I do think they need some additional funds, because they've also have the struggle that if we engage a Parks and Open Space Master Plan update is going to be a huge endeavor. And I want them to be able to not only accomplish the plan, but then also to be able to implement and continue with the maintenance operations as needed. The only suggestion that I would have is I would recommend using either landfill license reserve or O&C for the master plan, and then consider my secondary request of the 35,000, which would be an increase in discretionary that would come out of 1002. I think it lessens the impact on the general fund. It allows us to preserve, I'm kind of hoping by the time we get to the bottom of the list to preserve some kind of ending balance in 1002. And so that's why I would suggest, because we've funded these types of planning efforts with O&C or landfill license, because it is a one-time, we have those funds that are discretionary, they're for one-time requests. And this is really a project that fits nicely with one of those two categories. And you'll see we haven't really approved any projects in a couple of years. O&C has $734,000 available. O&C has 734,000 and landfill license reserve has 616,000. I know landfill license in particular, the revenue coming into that is in question long-term, but it does seem like that would be, either one of those. O&C does have potential of funds coming in, but I would just kind of point to one of those two categories, because you have a lot more flexibility in being able to address needs with preserving some general fund and general operating contingency there. And where these are great for one-time projects, like a master planning effort, but I don't know, I'll stop talking.
Well, I think that I really appreciated your kind of like preamble to it. So thank you for that. And thanks for just being their liaison. I also appreciate that. I can see a pretty strong argument personally for using the landfill license reserve fund, since one of our biggest tracts of land is an old landfill that two of them, that's right. And one of them really needs to have, that second request, that 35,000, we can't use it because, a lot of reasons, but yet we need to make sure that we have a plan for using all these spaces. And we incur a lot of costs by having landfills, as you all have seen in the budget now, that we hold on fund too. So I can see the benefit of using that fund.
And the connection, just to clarify, because we do have the solid waste account that does the maintenance and operations. The reason there's a connection with parks is just historically, there always has been. I mean, these are two large undeveloped tracts that have in the past been included in a master planning effort to either determine potential long use value or anything along those lines. So that's
Yeah.
a good reminder on that connection.
The only thing I would hesitate on is just the long-term viability of the landfill reserve. You know, I'm okay with ONC if that's a better suggestion than the ARPA general fund 1002 funds, but
Well, do you, I'm happy to let you make a motion on it, but I think that using the ONC fund would be perfectly fine.
Okay.
And it's clearly needed to get, as you noted, get a little bit more certainty. The Parks Advisory Board, in addition to the Parks Manager, a very valuable group of people, and be good to have them be able to have some direction.
sure. Okay, well, Chair, I would like to make a motion that we approve item 6, which is a one-time request for $100,000 for a Parks and Open Space Master Plan to come out of the ONC Reserve Fund.
Second?
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor of the one-time request of $100,000 for the funding of a master plan for the parks and open space, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, motion passes. All right, so now we're on to the $35,000 for the general fund allocation for the parks for general maintenance and projects, which I know we discussed in.
Chair, I'll make a motion for approval of item 7, general fund allocation increase for parks for general maintenance and projects in the amount of $35,000 to come out of the general fund.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor of a general fund allocation of an increase of $35,000 for the parks for general maintenance and projects, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Passes. Number 8, county surveyor, one-time funding request for renewing of survey equipment for $75,400.
This would be another one that I would recommend that if we could look at, if it's decided to approve the funding, to look at ONC or video, or not video lottery, ONC or landfill license reserve.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, but
Chair, so are we making the assumption that for this ARPA revenue loss general fund 1.352409 are we assuming that we want to save that and not spend it? Or, because I don't know.
I'm twofold. I'm looking at the list further down, and I also think that they're, I would, I said I didn't want to put a number to it, but I do realize that when we're looking at the general fund, and again, this is just a recommendation. I don't want to be held to this number. I don't want to, with the $2.6 million that we have for an ending balance, I really think it'd be prudent to at least keep $1 million at least as an ending balance in 1002 as a general operating contingency. I don't want to put it into a contingency, but I think it's going to be important to maintain at least some. As you can see from previous presentations, what we've done, we rely a lot on beginning balances in order to build the budget each year. And if we don't budget any type of reserve or ending balance in 1002, that makes me very uneasy, especially with we're in negotiations right now. We've had a lot of discussions around personnel costs and things like that. Next year's a bargaining year with our other 3 unions as well. So we have a lot of things just looking down the road that I want to keep in mind. So but don't hold me to that number. I'm just,
Okay, because I have plans for it, so
you know,
we seem to be.
so it's just something that as we're going through, and I don't,
I'm glad I asked.
I'm not saying that we only have $926,000 available, because I also recognize that this is all, a projection that we have, and a lot of times our revenues do come in better than what we have budgeted, but at the same time, it's my job to sit here and sweat contingencies and any balances probably, and it's really important to me to keep some funds in reserve.
So to follow up on that last budget cycle, what did we end with in the general fund? What was the,
Actually, it was
balance.
in a really good place.
was it 4 point, was it that 4 point?
Correct.
It was a larger amount.
It was a large amount, because
But
there
we
was
didn't-
twofold. We were holding some in reserve. We also had property taxes came in better than projected. So there was a lot of things, because when that was built, there was a lot of unknowns on what was going to happen with property taxes and revenues. And admittedly, Derek gives me a lot better projections than I feel comfortable loading into the budget, and Derek and I have had discussions and disagreements on this, and I've tried to find a balance between the two, but I still, again, it's my budget philosophy, stay conservative on your revenues and expect the worst with your expenditures. And that's how we build this budget. And so we did really well on some of our revenues in 1002 in previous years, but I don't necessarily want to bet the farm on that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but we also, was it last year's that we held flat any increases in discretionary allocation, or was it the
It was
previous
2
year?
years ago. We
Okay.
held flat on increases, and we only funded one-time requests.
Mhm.
Or was that last year? All the years are starting to blend together now. But you're right. It was one of the 2 years that we did hold flat with no general increase, and we only funded requests that were presented during the budget process.
So if memory serves, typically we have a beginning balance or ending balance of around 2.5 million. Is that typical?
For this
Or at least
year,
that's what I thought we started from last time.
well, it varies from year to year, because again, it depends on how much, there's a lot of variables. Again, we're trying to do our best to forecast what the beginning balance is going to look like, that we're going to look at our spending. For this year, bringing forward, yes, that's the 4 million. And is what we have projected for July 1 is going to be that $4 million.
But in previous years, I want to say it was closer to 2.5, maybe 3.
Well, we always bring forward a reserve for the future. A lot of our funds that we've reserved have been in anywhere from 1.6, 1.9, 2.8 is what we've adopted as ending balances. And then the nice part is then we end up with that. Plus, if we're over collecting or if our revenues come in higher, it also feeds into that. There's also some other revenues that, we're keeping an eye on because of legislative changes. But again, property taxes, and sometimes we'll get a decision on a long-standing, we haven't had one of those, a really large one in quite some time, but we did have one a few years ago that really that was a large amount that came into this fund. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
so big picture we're starting at 4.462.
Mhm.
We're now down to, we started at 2.6, but a big chunk of that is ARPA, right? 1.352. So this budget has absorbed a lot of money.
Oh, yes,
to the tune of $3 million or so, where we have
yes,
sort of eaten up our ending balance
correct,
or beginning balance.
correct.
Okay, so that's concerning.
Keeps me awake.
Ken, there's a table number 2 that's beginning balances for 2021 to 2022. And Fund 10-02 in the discretionary was 6,948,530. So that, would that have been at the beginning balances when the budget for 2021 through 2022 was considered?
No,
Okay,
that
or
was,
it was at the end of 2022.
the table you're looking at is the audited beginning balances for the current fiscal year.
Okay,
So that was a good example to where we had a budgeted reserve for the future. I'd have to go back and find it again. So a portion of that was budgeted. The other portion of it, a little more than the other half. I want to say it was 2.6 or 2.8 million was budgeted. And then anything above that was where we did, number one was our revenues came in higher, but then the second part is we always budget a contingency, and we haven't had to spend into our contingency funds either. So that's another one that you see 1092 with us, which is our contingency fund. And I think we had $500,000 budgeted this current fiscal year. If we don't get into that, that also goes back into 1002. So there are some funds that we do set aside in contingency that we're hoping we don't spend. And when we don't spend it, that also contributes to that beginning balance.
okay. Does the contingency fund get depleted and reset to 0 every year? And I asked that because from the table I'm looking at that was in the binder, it was at 0 at that point in time.
Correct. Yeah, we don't move it into that fund and then it sits in an account. It's essentially it's not a transfer. We identify $500,000 and identify it as contingency fund. And then at the end of the year, whatever's not used of that fund goes back into 1002 and shows up as a beginning balance there.
Okay.
So I did want to know, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
I'm just bringing us back to the survey, or if that's okay.
That's what I was gonna ask.
Okay.
Question.
So and this, I guess, a question probably for you, since Director Friday isn't here and Jason's not, is I see 3 memos that have a total request of 71,400.
Oh.
But then the number is 75,400. And so I may be missing one, but there's also some random like emails.
Yeah, there's some old stuff that I think I'm not sure why they were submitting that as part of the memo.
It was enlightening. I just don't think it was enlightening to the memo
Right.
necessarily. And I wanted to give some, at least maybe for Jason too. I think it was last year, but maybe it was the year before. Time is weird. There was a request with the departure of our longtime surveyor, engineer, former road director, that we actually start again with funding a real professional surveyor on their own. And so there's a general fund allocation I'm looking at of about 80,000. And so there's a budget that has a starting balance of 167 and an ending balance of 124. And there's a request for one-time funds. And in the context of having an ending balance, it might seem weird to have that, but if we don't fund it, he'll take it out of the ending balance, and the next year he won't really have a beginning balance. Right. And so that's just a kind of a thing that we have to, like, at least for me, I have to grasp is, if we don't approve a funding request, he's going to use his general fund dollars that he gets, and then he's going to have a less stable budget in the future. And the surveyor is one where at least the planning director likes to keep a significant starting balance, beginning and ending balance, because the world of planning and surveying is so hyper variable. I just want to give you some context for that.
Thank you.
I'm seeing 81,400.
That's what I'm seeing
Oh,
too.
maybe I did my math wrong then.
Well, it was 16,000, then.
Oh, yeah, that is 81,000,
65,
not 75.
65,400.
65 for there.
Yeah, so the number's incorrect. It looks like in going back through the memo, I probably need to go back and maybe the original email where this was sent me a different number. I'm not sure. You're right. Thank you for pointing that out, that the request on the sheet is 75,400. However, based on the memos coming forward, it's 81,400.
Mhm.
Chair, I think we should proceed with this because this is such a critical part of our county functions
And if
and
you,
affects very
yeah.
many departments. So,
if you read the memo, it's like really, really old equipment.
I use that department a lot.
Yeah.
And I've heard the grumbling. And
Yes.
I've went through all the surveyors that have come and gone, and so, yeah. The technology that's out there lets them do so much more
Mhm.
on their own in so much less time, such less time and much more efficient.
I would move approval of us to grant one-time funding request for renewing survey equipment and the amount being
81,400.
81,400 and then changing this here.
I would second that.
what fund, Ken, did you recommend?
I would say it'd be another good one. I think there's plenty of room for either ONC or landfill license.
And have it come from ONC. Would add that to my motion.
Great, and I would ratify the second, or second the ratify, modify.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor of a one-time funding request for renewing of surveying equipment of $81,400 coming from the ONC reserve account, say aye.
Aye.
Could we take a break?
All opposed?
That's it. That's his call.
All right. I don't know if we heard Doreen on that.
I,
All right,
as in yes.
all right, we got you. All right, we'll take a 5-minute break and come back.
Everybody waits for the magic.
All right, let's bring meeting back to order. We are on assessors. General fund allocation increased to restore appraisal 3 position of $70,560.
Chair,
Yes, Commissioner.
I want to suggest that we go ahead and allow this. Couple of reasons. I don't know that it was there. It was filled when it was. I think Derek tried to fill it. I think if it can be filled, that would be great. These are positions that are not. They're such a high skill level and so specialized. I would like to, just grant that allocation to restore that position. And if it can be filled, we'll fill it. And, hopefully that will happen.
And I will say that I think that makes sense, Commissioner Stara, especially since part of it is already there, right? Like this is just a 7/10, I think, of the total position.
And if it's not filled, then we either have, a greater beginning balance, or perhaps it's used for, hiring a lower level appraiser and, bringing them up at a lower level. So I think either way.
I agree. I think Derek talked about how hard it is to fill a position for 6 months and not know if that person can remain for the next 6 months. So, Commissioner, did you want to move approval?
Yes, I move approval of the allocation to restore the appraiser 3 position.
I second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor of a general fund allocation increase of $70,560 to restore an appraiser 3 position in the assessor office, say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, motion passes. Number 10, Sheriff, one-time request for Patrol Division 10043 to purchase equipment of $100,000.
And my apologies for not getting very descriptive. I only have so much room in that cell, but there was the memorandum that the sheriff presented.
And Chair, I would say that I think that especially in light of how a lot of this is either equipment that wears out over time or is new safety equipment to adapt to a changing landscape, I think that's an important request to approve.
Is that a motion?
Well,
What did we get?
Chair, if I might, I was kind of looking at this one and then the tasers and body cameras, which is number 12, line 12, as potentially an ARPA, expense.
I have a suggestion. I was waiting until we got down to the tasers and body camera project. I have another proposal just that I'd like to put out there on the table is, and this doesn't, I don't think this requires budgetary, even though we could, it's something, I haven't even talked to the sheriff about it, but one thought that I have is I do see in particular the body camera functions as a means for helping to mitigate risk and our exposure that comes to the county by documenting that. And it seems to me that instead of using general fund or some of the ARPA funds, I'd like to work with the sheriff on the funding for this through Fund 80, our insurance reserve. It seems like, and I could take a look at it and ensure we have sufficient funds to pay for this, because I know this is a multi-year project, but I'd like to propose that we use general liability insurance reserve for this equipment purchase. I really see this as a risk mitigation measure. And so then that way that takes one of these requests off of the table for today. And then I do believe we have sufficient funds. I'm looking at Justin, but I do think we have some ability to pay for the project, especially for what's being proposed on a year-by-year basis to pay for that at an insurance reserve.
Are we talking about just cameras?
I would say, because I think this is cameras and taser because they're one and the same. They're
It's a package deal?
Yeah.
So line number 12, that is a 5-year commitment, right?
It would be line 14 on my list. If I'm
Oh,
Well, I think it's line 12 on ours.
Yeah.
it's 116,551 per year for 5 years, correct?
Yeah, it's almost $600,000.
well, yeah, that's
total.
what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So, Sheriff, I don't know if you can answer a couple questions on that.
I need to just scroll to the left.
So it's a 5-year phase in, well, it's just a 5-year plan to pay for it. But does that allow you to have does that front load the equipment so that you guys are getting all of the new equipment in the first year?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
that includes brand new tasers and body cameras for every employee in the patrol division and the jail. And then
Okay.
they would, plus a bunch of training equipment and everything.
It's a lease program.
Yeah, so it's a
essentially.
lease
Okay.
program. So
Yeah.
the first year, I know if we take that total package of the total project of the 587, split that over 5 years, it's roughly 115 a year. I think the first year is just slightly a little bit more. And then the subsequent years 2 through 5 are slightly less because you have setup costs the first year.
Okay.
But that would include everything: software, access to store all the data, store all the video, evidenceroom.com, access for the DA's office to be able to send videos back and forth. It's all there. And then the plan is as we continue down the project over the next 5 years, there are other funding options out there that we can start looking for once we have a program up and running, that we can apply for funding to continue the program or find ways within our existing budget to support that.
Okay. Yeah, and I agree with Ken. It's more of a liability issue than a connection to ARPA, perhaps.
Yeah.
you
Especially the
know,
cameras.
The sheriff has been pushing for this for many, many years. And we've had several instances in our jail, et cetera, that could have benefited from having a camera on the body. So my question though is that we have on our list a transfer of 250 to insurance reserve to try and build up that.
Yeah, but I was also, that's something further down the list. I was going to suggest that we forego that transfer for this year.
Okay.
Just
So-
seeing the types of requests and going through this when I originally built this, it is a discussion, but I think we could have that discussion next year. I think there's other priorities. I think we have sufficient funds in insurance reserve. I do want to start looking long-term, at doing more transfers into insurance reserve for the eventual, if the county decides to go self-insured at some point, we're going to need to do something. But for this year, I was going to suggest that we forego that transfer.
Okay.
Again, I'm trying to keep some reserve funds in 1002. So,
And that's even considering the conversation we had about CIS and maybe their ongoing demands of what we budget for.
correct. We built the budget when we went through Fund 80. We did budget and appropriate additional funds, and we have some contingency funds in Fund 80. Not enough to go self-insured or to go down that path, but I do feel confident that we've built enough funds in there to, support this project. Because I really do, for this one in particular, I see it as a risk mitigation measure. And if it helps reduce our liability by having further documentation that supports the deputy's actions in the use of force incident, it just makes logical sense that it would fit here. And then the second part is I would also just like to forego the transfer of the 250. So I'd ask to withdraw that request.
Okay,
Thank you.
sound good? Okay, so then do we need a motion?
We need a motion. on the
Before-
one.
I just want to ask a little bit more, if you don't mind, about the insurance reserve. So am I reading this correctly that in Fund 80, there's an initial unappropriated balance of 2.6 million?
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Great, thank you.
And again, that's a projected beginning balance that we have in there. We never project we're going to stop spending. So that's a projection for next year's beginning balance. Because again, a lot of things could happen. We could end up with a large claim or something that we may have to pay between now and the end of June. But, so our position may be a little bit better than that. So.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Commissioner.
Oh, I think we do need a motion though to be able to spend the money in Fund 80, correct?
I don't think it would hurt. Well, I think the first one is there's the first request, which is the other equipment, which is the
Yeah, it's the
whatever
one,
it's called.
yeah, the one-time allocation. So
I
we
was
have some
saying the vehicle.
department equipment, stop sticks. We got some shields that we're
Right.
looking at purchasing. But yeah, that's all equipment that we just purchase at one time, and there's no ongoing expense for those issues.
What fund would that?
That would be a general
I would
fund.
general
propose general
fund
funding.
on that.
Commissioner Bershauer was I think suggesting ARPA dollars, and that's kind of, at this point with what we have left, that's kind of is ARPA dollars.
Well, because we were talking about both the items, because we were also talking about the one further down the list. And
Oh,
so we
right.
kind of jumped a little bit out of order. This would be one, it could be general fund, or it could be landfill license, or it could be ONC. It could be any of those. Because again, it's a one-time equipment purchase.
I would like to move to approve the one-time request for Patrol Division to purchase equipment for $100,000.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Do we have a discussion?
Was that general fund?
General.
Okay.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor of a one-time request for purchase of equipment for the Patrol Division of $100,000 from the general fund, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Motion passes. We have a general fund allocation increase for Patrol Division 010-043 to restore position of $137,747.
Ken, what's our balance now?
The
How
general
many?
fund balance.
Mhm.
1756168.
Sorry, I'm just reading.
That's all right.
Yeah, I'm trying to catch up. Chair, I will make a motion to approve a general fund allocation increase for the patrol division to restore that position in the amount of $137,747
Second,
from the general fund.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor of a general fund allocation increase of $137,747 for increase of a patrol division 010-043 to restore position, say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, motion passes. And then on this next one, are we going to, you want to make a motion?
I don't know if it requires a motion the more I thought about it right now, because I have the funds, I believe, appropriated in Fund 80, and I don't think it's already built into Fund 80, so it doesn't require a change to the budget.
Okay.
This is more of an operational thing. It's
Okay.
I'll work with the sheriff and we'll pay for the expenses directly. We're not going to transfer the funds from Fund 80 to the sheriff. It's
Right.
just that the costs will be coded directly to Fund 80.
Okay.
That
So
makes sense.
Okay.
All right,
we got a deal.
So
so then
just-
the
Nice
next
job.
one, we discussed, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
So now we're down to community requests. We have a request from Yamhill County Aries for $2,500 for funding of radio equipment.
Chair, I wanted some clarification on this one.
I was gonna say, don't go anywhere.
Because
back
it
down.
just,
You
it's
can,
just the
though.
gift that keeps on giving and that's already covered, right? But I think it was just out of maybe habit that it's here. It's
Yes.
covered though. I mean,
Yes.
this
Yeah,
is,
so
taken care of.
last year, you guys, I think you had CERT and Areas that
Uh-huh.
had both requested
Mhm.
roughly 2,500. You gave 5,000 to the 1040 budget, which was EM. This year, we moved that 5,000 into the 1043 budget, primarily because there are other volunteer units also within our office. So I think the question, given our financial situation in 1043, we just left it at 5,000. But we know that CERT Aries traditionally request some funding for equipment. But we also have our search and rescue and VRU that periodically at times need money for that. So as of right now, we don't have it earmarked for anything, but I do know that Aries and CERT are traditionally the two that request the most assistance. And so we do have 5,000 already set in a line where of funding requests like this could be funded.
and so, and search and rescue was funded
To the
through
tune of 20,000
Yeah.
for ARPA.
20,000.
Mhm.
Correct.
So that's not to play favorites, but if they come to us, then we know there's a need and then we can address it. But if we don't know, then we can't, which is why we always hear from
Yeah.
certain areas.
Is, Sheriff, would it be fair to maybe rotate through those 4 or 5 other groups?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be an internal conversation
Yeah.
that we'll have that now that CERT, Aries, VRU, they're all under the sheriff's office umbrella. We're going to bring in all of the leaders of each of the organizations to talk about that same concept and how can we maximize grant opportunities in the community, make sure we're not competing against each other.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, kind of rotating the money through and see what the need is, because some years CERT may have a really important need that may need all 5,000 of it. And if my emergency manager comes to me and says they really need this money, we have that ability to access that money. But because it just felt weird that it was sitting in emergency management just because of a certain areas with the other pieces, we just moved it into 1043, but it's still got its own line item. It's 5,000. Our accounting department can account for who gets what, and they can make the formal requests.
Sounds great.
So are we moving forward with, is this a formal request in this year?
No,
So
No,
can
it's gonna
scratch
be
that.
kind of absorbed into.
Okay, so number
No,
one,
it's not a formal request.
Well, I think I've had a discussion with Mr. Beals. I
Yeah,
think he
and-
understands that.
Yeah, and that's fine. And if Ken, if you want to take whatever they have sent to route that through myself, or I can ask my
Okay.
emergency manager
Okay.
to take a look. But yeah, when the budget is adopted and approved, then there will be $5,000 available for us to spend on those organizations.
And
So I'm
just-
going to note for the record that there's not going to be any action taken and we're going to route it to emergency management.
That would be perfect.
And just for, so last year we did 5 too, right?
Correct, yeah. And CERT got $2,500 worth of equipment and Aries got 2,500
Okay.
Yeah. in this current fiscal.
Sounds good.
Before we get into the discussion about the rest of them, I just had sort of an overall, Chair, if I could make an overall observation about these. Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Every year, this is before we had ARPA and CARES and any of that, we had community members coming to ask for grants. And the grants were, it was pretty much this organic, whoever felt like they needed something in the community. And then, you had the usual players, the same organizations that would come for some significant funding, and it was large sums at some point. I mean, we had, bypass allocations and Family Place and Homeward Bound. I think it's different this year in that a lot of the organizations have received ARPA funding. And then I also look at the original intent, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, about the original intent of the public hearing during budget, and that is to make observations, comments, input on the proposed budget, so that there could be some input from the public. What it has come to is people coming and asking for significant amounts of money in this process. I'm looking at what we've done and what we've done this past year, and what we used to do, which was a lot more of a comprehensive, involved grant program. And I think that this year, my recommendation would be is that we do not award any funding through that process because of what we just went through, and because it just has this inherent unfair feel to it, where we've got folks who come to us, and each one of these is worthy of funding, I believe. But how do we address the fact that there are so many organizations? How do you pick the winners and losers? And again, we didn't have happy campers after the last one. And if you say no to somebody, you say yes to someone else, there's always that. I think if we're going to do it, we should have more of a structured, the way we're putting this out there, instead of it just, whoever shows up. So I was just going to say, and also looking at the, how much money we've been taking from general fund and other funds, it's that we don't know what's coming down the pipe. We know that there are some forecasts of significant foreclosures, and how is that going to impact our county? And I'm just saying, I'd rather be super, super prudent and look for funding wherever we can. And that's why I would be reticent about approving any of these.
Chair, so the history of community requests is, there's nothing that says we have to do it.
No, what we have to do is we have to have the public input component as part of the budget process, which we do via 2 hearings. And this hearing associated with the budget committee has turned into where we see a lot of requests, probably more requests than we do comments. And it's usually at the hearing in June, when we do the public hearing and getting ready for adoption, is when we start getting more of the comments on the actual budget. Yeah, I mean, it's part of that public participation requirement that comes with it. It doesn't mean that folks can't come next year to the hearing and make a request that I think this should be funded, and I think there should be a priority here, or fund this project or program. I mean, that's still there. I'll admit that we're in kind of this unique time right now, because over the last 2 years, the number of grants and programs and things that we've been rolling out has really been unprecedented for the county. This used to be, this and economic development were kind of the two areas that were really the only times that the county really funded requests. But that's kind of changed and with a lot of the programs that we're rolling out. Some thoughts that I would just share is, like, in particular, the Sheridan School District project in particular, we did have identified as part of the impacted industries workforce development and some funds identified there as part of that program. That might be worthy to have a discussion with the board at a later date and look, that's one of them that's pending a discussion. Childcare and workforce development and economic development were kind of 3 categories that were next in line for us to have a discussion on what a program would look like. And it seems like the Sheridan School District, that's an opportunity through that. And we haven't finalized an idea of what that program's even going to look like yet. So, I mean, there are funds available to fund this type of project with the ARPA funds that we have sitting in Fund 32 as well.
Yeah.
And I know that some of the nonprofits on here, I believe Homeward Bound Pets was just awarded funds as part, and I know that was for a capital project. And Helping Hands was one I don't believe was funded with the nonprofit grant. So, but there are some other opportunities that I think are coming up with some of the other grant programs. I'm not speaking to Helping Hands because, but under the ARPA, again, we have childcare, workforce development, and some impacted industry grants that we're going to be rolling out here in the coming months.
Yeah.
So,
And maybe Commissioner Starrett, your comments, and then considering that, we went from 4.4 some million down to, pretty low number. So maybe it is where we're in a situation where we just kind of have to make a policy decision about putting a moratorium on community requests for a while until we see how things work out going forward. That's maybe more of a board discussion, but I was going to suggest that we consider the CTE school as part of ARPA, as part of the economic impacts. It looks like we have 680,000 in workforce training, and then to be determined is another almost $1 million.
Oh, that's right. And
So-
there was like I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's correct.
No,
There was a
you're-
recommendation, a loose recommendation from EDAC of like, hey, in the next round of money, maybe we could consider, but it was really dotted lines around that board.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if my colleagues have met with Abishaw and the folks at the CTEC school, but I think what they're thinking and hoping is that we gear that money towards the school, because you're checking off a lot of boxes when you're talking about workforce training and some of the impacted industries and their needs. So that's where I was sort of headed with that consideration. And under that, we would not be funding any of them at this time.
And Commissioner Bershauer, are you, actually, I think your last statement just answered my question, which was, are you suggesting that we fund it now with those pots of money, or do we wait and do a more formal process of saying, hey, we want to hear from you. Does this meet our goals of this pot of money and this pot of money?
I
And
think
maybe
of
that was a
that,
question.
I think of that as a board discussion. Yeah,
and if I could
That's
make
what I was
a recommendation, because with the funds, because we had already started early discussions with SEDCOR, Willamette Workforce Partnership, the CCO on some of those other categories, and they've prepared proposals that we just haven't been able to schedule yet. So I wouldn't necessarily want to use this to then change course when staff has been working with it. I think it's still subject to board discussion and approval. I just want to do it in a manner that we're not just, that they don't get the feeling we're disregarding their proposals that they have submitted and are
Totally.
pending
Yeah,
discussions.
Well, we have monopolized the conversation, forgive me, budget committee members, but I wanted to lend my voice, kind of echoing and supporting Commissioner Sterrett's observations about both the purpose of the public hearings and putting off some of the funding requests so that they can be more intentionally directed through some of our American Rescue Plan money that we've already had discussions about where it should go. So I'm definitely in support of that kind of framework.
Thank you.
So do we have a motion to suspend?
Would we need a
Funding.
motion?
Do we need a motion, or do we say we're gonna not move forward? to this?
action.
We're gonna take no action at this time?
I guess.
I mean, if
there-
we're going to suspend going forward any community first, then maybe that's. something.
I mean,
We're not, we're not doing that as a policy. We're just saying that this is, on right now.
my recommendation is just probably for clarity for the organization, so they know where they stand and
Yeah.
we're not getting requests. Well, does this mean no? Does this mean we could, any updates on what you're going to do with that? And you could do it as you don't have to do it one by one. You could do a batch motion on all the categories that, moving, not to fund the request as presented
At this time.
at this time, but then encourage, to look for, especially Sheridan School District or some of these other ones that we do have some other programs that are going to come available in the future.
Mhm.
I motion towards you mostly as in budget committee members who aren't commissioners. We've expressed ourselves a lot to you.
Well, I tell you what, I would love to give everybody money, but there's only so much money to go around, and I understand Mary's point. So I agree.
I was speaking to Jason earlier, just that in the first years that I showed up here, the reserves that were there were different. And looking at it, I came into this pleasantly surprised at how well the money was managed. Not that I thought it was managed bad. When you come in and you see how well it, and the philosophy and the way you guys look at budgets, I was impressed. I like that. I try to run my businesses that way. And seeing over the years getting to a point where, on a $180 billion budget, we have this small of a reserve left. As if I was the business owner, I would have sleepless nights. That is a very small percentage of wavering on things that you can recover from. And so I think at this point being very prudent or very cautious with the spending. And I'm with Jason. These ones I would fund. I see the need and I understand them. But as where we sit financially as a county, I would agree with Commissioner Sterrett. So
I wanted to make sure that we had Doreen had an opportunity too. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Well, there's one thing I looked over of the school project a little more thoroughly than maybe some of the other ones, because the other ones were a little more simple, but I really love the idea of this school. One of the things that I was going to say, if we were going to go into discussions about this one, is to not make the commitment at this time, because the information, at least what's presented, and they're not going to give you the entire, thing, I understand, but it seems that they still have a long way to go and there's a lot of, missing data. But one of the things I thought might be interesting is they're going to have to update their budgets too, because building costs are entirely different. So I don't know, what kind of dates these have, but that expense could be a lot higher. I just think there's a lot of missing pieces yet, but perhaps the county, if some of the fees and permits and other expenses that would naturally go to the county, maybe those could be waived proactively ahead to help them reduce the overall cost, because they're going to have to seek more money elsewhere. So maybe a gesture but that would be a commissioner board thing, I suppose. But that's what I had in mind. So if we were to budget maybe a smaller amount, if we were going to discuss it, for those soft costs that the county would not be paying out, but just would forego permit fees or something like that, if there's something in there that falls in that category. But I love the idea. It's cool. And as for the rest, I'm perfectly fine with letting these go and other avenues being pursued.
And I will say during that, I think it's a good idea. There are very few things that are county specific permitting fees that we would have the opportunity to consider or have a position on waiving, is my understanding. Just looking at the list here, I do know that the Sheridan School District is keeping a very keen eye on the costs of things. So,
And the build outs that they're saying what double than projected, the construction costs.
right.
Yeah, and Doreen, I think what they're looking for is local buy-in from the county so that they can then use that to go get grants to help them complete the funding.
Yes, and I kind of figured that might be true already. But anyway, I like the idea of the school very much.
Well, Chair, I would be happy to make a motion. I can be the baddie on the record, as it were. But let me pull it together. I move that we deny the community requests for the 2022-2023 budget for Homeward Bound Pets, Sheridan School District, Nerd Herd, and Helping Hands Equine Therapy. Caveat that I should declare a potential conflict of interest because I believe my daughter may be involved with the Nerd Herd in the next fiscal year.
So how come you didn't do a conflict of interest when you voted to give your mother-in-law a raise?
Because we talked about this one, Ken and I did.
I was just like, well, the rutabaga defense just never surfaced.
I also did vote to give myself money, so without declaring an actual conflict of interest, because I couldn't figure out how to do it without stepping down there.
I second.
Oh.
Oh, sorry.
Nope, you got it.
All right, so we have a first and second. We have a motion and a second to deny, or is it deny or not make a,
I think we could just vote
Not
if
move
you
forward.
wanted to.
The motion is to deny the request.
Okay, we have a
So
motion.
yes is a negative. So
we have a motion to deny the request for the 22-23 community requests of Homeward Bound Sheridan School District, Nerd Herd, and Helping Hands Equine Therapy. All in favor of this denial, say yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion passed.
yeah, it's one of those odd ones where a yes is a no.
Yes.
So then the last category that we have, this is something that we have approved as part of the process, and you can do it individually or you could do it as a group. Historically, we've always kind of done the reclasses as one. All of the reclass requests that have been presented for this year are in fact built into the budget. There's no additional funding request with it. This is a personnel action to support that. And right, you gave me the look.
It hasn't been built into fund
Okay,
80.
the one for administration, but we do have sufficient funds and appropriation authority in there to support the reclass. So that is actually not reflected in the budget, but it's a pretty small change.
Yes.
But otherwise, all the HHS ones are reflected in the budget. Sorry. I butchered that because you gave me the look like, huh? So
I would move approval of the personnel requests.
I would second that.
We have a first and a second to approve the multiple reclass of positions at HHS. All in approval, say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, motion passes. And we have administration, HR analyst to senior HR analyst. That's what you just spoke of, right?
We just did the whole group.
We did
based
it
on
all?
the motion.
Okay.
I just want to bring one thing up, and I've talked to Ken about this. I feel like we've asked Ken to do an awful lot in the last year or so, and had a discussion about how can we lighten the load and perhaps get a deputy, somebody who could do a lot of the stuff he's doing, the chief budget officer, all the ARPA grants, all the personnel stuff, all the admin stuff. I feel it's one of those things where we're going to ask somebody to do so much that it will just become just too burdensome. And I'm concerned that at some point, Mr. Hupper's going to say, I don't want to do this anymore. So looking at what it's been like the last year, I've brought up the possibility of extra help, a deputy, something along those lines. And I just wanted to throw it out there of what that looks like. I know we're looking at funding, funding issues, but that's one piece of this. We have somebody in administration who is a grants and special projects. And what I would, in order to fund this, what I would recommend, or even not to fund it, but just to get some of the relief out of that budget, was to move that person, either part or whole of the FTE, into economic development, maybe leave 0.25 in administration, free up some of the money, because then the economic development pot of money or video lottery dollars could cover the cost or the lion's share of that employee. And then we wind up having a little bit of relief in that administration budget. So those are just some things I've talked to Ken about. I don't know how everybody feels, but you're looking at this budget and it's just taken a beating.
Chair, so we've had numerous conversations about many of these pieces. I would agree and maybe add, though, that as part of our ongoing discussions about economic development and how we retool that department so that we're getting the maximum bang for our buck. Denny, you kind of mentioned some of those concerns yesterday. That we maybe shift away from doing cash grants to businesses, and we actually invest that money into people that are going to do that work for us in the county. Video lottery is pretty consistent in terms of a revenue stream. Certainly more consistent than admin, and we've talked a little bit in the past 2 days about the challenges with the administrative budget. I would love to see everyone who does economic development work in that department, so that we have SEDCOR who works directly with our grants manager, who works directly with, potentially somebody like a small business advocate or something in the future, that they're all together, they're all working together in the department. And that frees up a little bit of the administrative budget, but I agree with Commissioner Sterrett that we need additional help here. And I don't know if the help needs to go into a deputy. I don't know if the help needs to go into like an HR, additional HR positions. But there needs to be some help here, because we have had a practice in the past of being very lean in terms of our administrative team. If you look at other counties, then I'm going to bring up Marion County. They have, those commissioners have their own assistants. They have policy advisors, and there is a deputy administrator, and they have a very strong team. Now, obviously that comes with a dollar figure. But we have historically been really lean in terms of our administrative functions. And I think that COVID kind of exacerbated the problems with that. And we're seeing that more and more. So I don't know what the additions would be, but I do feel like long-term, the discussions around economic development would be better suited if we did have those people together in the same department.
And do you mean the same fund?
Sorry, yes.
Okay.
same fund, Sorry.
So one thought that, depending on how the committee wants to go, looking at a budgetary function on how to do this. The one thought would be is hearing the discussion up to this point. One thought would be, because I budgeted, when I built Fund 26, there is an ending balance of 358,350 that's in that fund. One suggestion would be is to reduce that beginning balance and move that into an expenditure line as part of the proposed approved budget. And then at least the funds would be appropriated, and then I could work with the board and come up with a plan on the policy direction that we want to go with Fund 26. And then I can come up with a plan on, how we're going to deliver on that, as far as the operational component. So the action we'd be looking at today is if we want to have the ability to have some flexibility to make some changes in how Fund 26 is set up. I need the appropriation authority within that budget. So the thought would be is, if you wanted to move $300,000 into an appropriated line, I'd have to go and dig up where that would go. That should give sufficient flexibility to facilitate those discussions and making some choices on what the staffing would look like, the FTEs and things like that, that wouldn't require reconvening or substantial change and having to reconvene the budget committee. And we can continue to have those talks as we move forward. But to me, it seems like if there's support for doing that, I think we need to move the funds out of the ending balance into an expenditure line to facilitate those discussions.
So if we took the dollar amount, our said core contract, our grants, put them all together in economic development. I mean, we've appropriated all the money for, in other words, these have been earmarked.
We've only built the appropriation authority based on the said core contract and the lobbyists. And there's not a lot of other appropriation remaining for doing anything else that's more substantial. In order to accomplish that, I'm just saying, just move $300,000. I'm not even sure what expense line. I don't know, Mike or Justin, are you guys looking at Fund 26 and have a thought?
I'm trying to find it.
So was the,
So we're discussing some positions that would come in directly with you to assist in some of your workload, correct?
It could. I mean, this is all Fund 26 is part of the kind of the central, economic development is under my umbrella, so to say. So what I'm proposing as a budgetary action is not necessarily to get into the details of moving FTE or building that into it. Those are discussions that can be had into the new fiscal year or as we work on those plans. But what I'm missing in Fund 26 in order to implement that would be sufficient appropriation authority to make those changes. And if we leave it at an ending balance, I can't touch it during the fiscal year. So that's why I'd propose, let's move $300,000 out of the ending balance into professional services. That line's going to look inflated. But again, the whole intent is to have the funds available to accommodate this plan going forward. It's not to contract. So,
Yeah.
So our grants manager is 1.0 FTE.
correct. In
So,
1010.
so that would work to fund that person if you moved it into professional services?
Possibly, I haven't,
Okay,
no,
Yeah.
if we can't fund a position out of a materials and services line. We would have to build a personnel category, personnel line. I'm not ready to kind of get into those details of what that would look like. That's why I'm saying, I just want to make sure we have the funds moved and appropriated, because if we approve the budget as is with the ending balance and we later adopt it, I can't spend out of that ending balance during the fiscal year. So I'm proposing we just move it up And we'll come up with a plan on what that's going to look like in Fund 26.
Okay. The other thing that I would just propose in that fund, the economic development, is to zero out the strategic investment grants, the small grants, and the startup grants, and move that money back into the beginning balance.
Okay. How much do we have budgeted there?
It would be an ending balance.
Ending
I think
balance.
technically.
So we have 125,000.
Mhm.
So, okay.
And I'll explain why. I just feel like we have done a lot of grant work in the past 2 years, 3 years really. And we had a discussion, the commissioners did early on, and when ARPA came out, that we weren't really excited about just giving cash grants to businesses because it's hard to do that and the accountability and everything. So I feel like we've been doing so much of that work that we need to just kind of sit on that money. I had a discussion with somebody the other day that did receive a startup grant from the county, and now they're moving their business to North Carolina. And so it's like, you know, that's really frustrating to hear when we only have so much money.
So the suggestion then, so I'll modify my recommendation, because if we're talking about not using those funds, but we can leave them there because they're appropriated.
Okay.
It's just that we won't use them for that grant fund. We will just make some budgetary changes to reflect the discussion kind of move. In fact, we could even make that prior to adoption as well. So instead of moving $300,000 from the ending balance, I would say let's move 200,000 from the ending balance, leave $158,000 ending balance. So that way we're not, and we'll have the funds that are not, in the grant lines that we're not planning to spend on grant lines, plus the $200,000 to accommodate planning for any FTE changes, position changes that we may want to incorporate in Fund 26.
We used to give away years ago, actually the commissioners would choose who was going to get it and everybody would apply. And it was really uncomfortable because you, again, as commissioners had to make these decisions. And one of the things I said is, are we keeping track of how people are using these and what's the accountability? And a number of them received, that were doing really well at the time, received some nice grants and then went out of business and decided they didn't want to do it anymore. And they had some wonderful businesses. And it was frustrating because we didn't have the bandwidth to follow up and see how our money was being spent. And I think that's a big piece of what we need going forward, is to be able to have, how did it work? We haven't done that, and we haven't had the manpower to do it.
I can hear Abisha right now telling me that's the struggle with the startup grants when you're investing in a brand new business, and we know that not all businesses make it, and so it is, that's the struggle with these types of grant programs. There's a certain amount of leap of faith that you're hoping that you can get a business off the ground and they're off and running for the next 30 years.
Okay.
But
Do you need a motion for that, to move that money?
yeah, I think we should. We can add it to the deliberation list.
So Chair, I'll make a motion that we move $200,000 from 2634-990.01, which is the ending balance of economic development, to 2634-610.01 professional services.
And not to throw something else mixed up even more, but we could also create an extra help line, a personnel line.
Yeah, we could do that too. Except for there's no personnel lines.
We can make it.
But again, we can appropriate it right now. We
Yeah.
can always fix that later, prior to budget adoption. So good point.
Would there be a dollar figure associated with that, or just a line? We wouldn't have any,
I was just thinking
The
a line right now.
200,000,
Yeah, just
the 200.
throwing that in there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So is that right?
Yes, we're moving $200,000. The motion is to remove $200,000 from ending balance and move it into materials and services. Right?
I said professional services. but-
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
And then can,
Isn't professional services contract?
We're just moving it into an expense line to
Okay.
create appropriation. Because, just like throughout the year, you remember when we add position authority all the time for positions, that's essentially the same function. They have appropriation and expenditure authority. They just don't have the position, so then they come to the board for the position authority. But what's critical is having the appropriation authority, because otherwise, if it's not appropriated, I can't spend it.
All right, so was that a motion?
There was.
That was much, yeah.
I second it.
We got a motion and a second.
It was, you were looking at me like, what? I realized, oh,
All right, any further discussion? Are we have a motion to move 200,000 from ending balance from 2634-990-01 to professional services at 2634-610-01. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
All opposed? All right, motion passes.
So Chair, that then brings us to the discussion about potentially adding something to the administrative, a position to the administrative budget.
and forgive me, do we not have a deputy right now?
We do.
Okay. I just wanted to speak about the elephant in the room. It was like,
well,
are we talking about somebody else?
well, if Justin's business services, and then we.
We changed it back to, because we do recognize that there's some needs. So that was one of the things that was in the budget that we presented. He's new nameplate.
That's not in the budget, Justin.
But it is there is a raise in the budget too, I will know.
But if you think about the work that Justin has done, we're adding more duties to that. So it's not like we're going to be able to, I mean, you had a full-time job. So it's not like you had nothing to do for part of the day. So I just want to make sure that we acknowledge that there is a significant amount of work that we can still offload from Ken.
And Commissioner, I appreciate your thoughts. And I think that what we now have, or there is the potential, we have budgetary authority. Like just
Correct.
thinking about where we are, where we're sitting right now and the time of the day and everything, that we have budget authority for Ken to make the policy decision, which I think is primarily under your purview, right, of position authority within administration.
The board has the policy.
Yeah.
Decision-making, but it's my job to figure out how we implement those policy and the staffing of
That's right.
that. So, as far as what has been created right now, I think it will give me an opportunity to go in and look at the staffing model and figure out, and if I have additional needs, I can always come back to the board prior to adoption and say, I have an additional funding request.
Okay, so we don't need to appropriate money right now.
I'll take money, but I'm just saying,
Well,
I don't
yeah.
believe so, because to be honest, the same thing, the same expectations that I have with departments. I wanted them to do their homework and make a presentation to support what, if I'm making a position request, I want to be able to present you with the numbers and have a justification on why I want those numbers. And I have to, practice what I preach. So hearing the conversation and discussions, I'm committing I'll take a look at that. And we have the additional appropriation. I'll look at Fund 26. I'll see how that kind of pencils out and what we're able to accomplish. I'll make that commitment to look at that.
Unless he's too busy.
Well, I guess I would just encourage, I mean, I know there's a lot of conversations and meetings and I get to step in one time a year and see. But hearing Mary's concern, I would just encourage you to look at that. Jason and I were talking, you are very impressive. And it is, every year I'm blown away at your knowledge and the way you handle this. So don't let yourself get burned out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Make sure you take care of yourself because
You do a great job.
That's why I drink. No. Water.
I think it's technically it's why you outfit your truck.
Straw.
Well, I wanted to,
Well, I was gonna,
that's
because you said
that's
there's
good.
a-
This is a very different conversation. So
you said there's a deputy administrator. So we took off the business services director, right? And then
Yeah.
we moved it up into deputy. Is
Yeah,
that
correct.
correct?
Yep.
But it's still 0.5. So is it funded from somewhere else?
Yes,
Fund 80 and-
Justin
yeah.
is, his position is split up between 1010, Fund 80, 1027,
4027
Okay.
or
they're all over.
4027,
and 4016
Okay, just making sure.
16.
too.
That's what I was
Got it.
thinking.
Okay.
and then I was looking at the community justice budget. So I'm going back to a long conversation that we've had on and off. And I'm looking at Commissioner Starrett because I talked with Jody at Remnant Initiatives yesterday after looking at this particular budget. And it turns out that they are still in closing, and that if we were able to find money for them, they would stop, reverse it. And I haven't talked to her since then because I was like, well, this is our job, right? Is to appropriate money for things. And so I just wanted to put that out to you that,
See, I had.
and I'm
asked her-
I'm very nervous, sorry, about saying like, hey, this department needs to budget or needs to do this thing. But our charge is to provide money to departments that they can choose to do what they want with it. Sorry to
No,
interrupt you.
I appreciate that because as soon as I got that email, I wrote back, I said, is it too late? What if we did an
Mhm.
11th
Mhm.
hour? You know, the
Yeah.
nuclear option of getting you something to keep going. And she said, no, we're done.
That's exactly what she said to me, whatever that was, a
2
week
weeks
or
ago,
2
yeah.
weeks ago. Yeah,
So is that still stand or is there a chance?
there's a chance. And so I just wanted to put that out here. We're right at the last minute. And again, I'm very careful because Director Beach is responsible for that. You're responsible for Director Beach, but our responsibility is to provide money for things.
However, the caveat with that is the restrictions around grant and aid with Fund 21. And that's where Jessica and her team needs to weigh in because unlike all the other funds that we've been talking about over deliberations, those are not discretionary funds that don't have strings attached and
Exactly.
limitations or restrictions.
And the reason why,
Right,
yes.
right.
We had a long list of things. And of course, RI was not on there because it was going away, right? But I'm just thinking about how we've gone through an exercise and what we value by putting money attached to it. And we do still have some general fund dollars. But I want to listen to you because I'm seeing
Well, one thought that I would like to do is I could have the follow-up conversation immediately with Jessica and talk about the funding, because admittedly, I'm trying to understand, what the limitations were.
Yeah.
Because I know that the services that they have provided, I'm not really clear, unlike some of the other ones where there was a licensing requirement or some of the other reasons on why, like HHS couldn't partner with some organizations because it's a licensing Medicaid rule.
Mhm.
I'm not really clear what was happening with Remnant Initiatives and Fund 21. And I think it would be a worthwhile discussion because, to have with Jessica, and we still have time. I mean, again, we have a whole other hearing and process before we go into final adoption. And if I remember correctly, that wasn't a large ask that they're looking for.
No.
66 grand.
That wouldn't necessarily put us into a need to reconvene the budget committee and all of those categories. The percentage would be small enough that, so I could, I can talk to Jessica. I feel better if Jessica's here participating in that conversation as the
Exactly.
director and as our expert
This
in
is a
those funds.
programmatic thing and
Mhm.
we're
Right.
just the funders at this point.
Correct.
And they lost
Right.
their grant, which is essentially why they couldn't pay
Right.
Remnant Initiatives and then they had to go away.
Right.
And I was just looking at, there's a couple of, obviously there's a justice reinvestment grant here and justice reinvestment grant here and a COVID supplemental funding that I wrote down. And
Mhm.
so they actually, Director Beach still has money that she hasn't spent. That was a line that stuck out to me, so.
Yeah, well,
And
thank
I
you for
realized
that.
that it's all very,
Yeah.
this is the thing you spend it on.
I'll talk to Jessica and then I can have her.
Maybe we reconsider it as an ARPA grant. It is, essentially they're helping with workforce training and engagement, post-prison population. So
Mhm.
there could be a nexus there that we could connect for, this year and then give Jessica some time to see if she can build it back in.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that'd be
And I know
great.
that one of their concerns, obviously, their board is they need that ongoing funding, just like anybody else. But the world of nonprofits is rarely
Mhm.
ongoing funding.
Well, thank you for that. 'Cause
Oh, yeah.
That's something
Yeah,
that's,
it was just like weighing on my mind and I was like, I'm gonna bring it up.
yeah,
It's good to hear.
it's wonderful.
Okay, we have, the one thing I want to make sure that there's a major
Yes.
action that's required by the budget committee before we adjourn today. So,
We didn't have a
um,
script for it.
Tax
so
rate.
we need to approve the budget and the tax rate. So, the motion would be, moving approval of the budget as amended and set the tax rate at 2.5775 per $1,000 of assessed value. I'm happy to share, whoever wants to make the motion.
Well, if you want me to read it back, you better pass it down here.
Is this on, property? Or which
Property
is,
tax.
okay.
Yeah.
Is it raising the property tax?
No,
Oh,
No.
We have
Holding.
not
been the same
raised-
for what, 30 years?
oh.
It's not permanent assessment.
Permanent, yeah.
I love Yamhill County.
Well, 50 makes it pretty hard to measure 50 makes it pretty hard
We
to
need a
change.
motion
Yeah.
and a second.
Yes.
I move that we approve the budget as amended and set the tax rate at $2.5775 per $1,000 of assessed value.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
What, just a second.
Aye.
I was,
You don't have to reread the motion.
No,
It's already
okay.
on the floor.
We
You
have
know.
5 of 6 voting yes.
aye. All opposed?
I was, yes, sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, that was easy.
All right.
It was messy, but it was easy.
All right.
I
Thank
I
you
went
all.
to the highlight and it
what's the
said
final
Mary
number? What
Stairs. And I was like,
Yeah.
I remember you reading that part.
I got
How much did we actually
I always
lose?
rip off the
157
last
is what we
page
left.
of the-
In the general fund?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, we haven't adjourned yet.
Oh, sorry.
So does that help you sleep at night? 157? 1.57?
No. But yes, it will.
And then we've got about 540,000 left in the ONC reserve. And about
See, my math is off.
150,000 in the video lottery.
Yeah, so all total, based on, if I've been putting it into a spreadsheet, barring technical issues with the spreadsheet. So in total, there were $3,266,502 in requests. That includes the community request. Of that, $1,355,439 general fund requests. But so what's been approved is $988,088 in general fund was approved. And I gave a balance for the reserve for the future in 1002 is $1,618,421. We didn't identify any projects for landfill license reserve. ONC, there was 181,400 identified, so then that took the amount available for other projects down to 553,132. And then we also made the $200,000 adjustment to video lottery. and I'll share this when I finalize this because I emailed this out to all the departments as well. So I'll finalize the deliberation list and I'll also share it with the budget committee members. And again, before we adjourn, I'm not sure which microphone is working at this point. Giving up. The first thing is I really want to thank the budget committee and especially, Doreen. I know you couldn't be here, but I still know that has the same level of time commitment as sitting here in the room without the climate changes and microphone issues and things like that. But and Denny and Jason, thank you very much for helping us get through this process. Thank you to Mike and Justin, the budget team, and I absolutely want to thank Carolina and Megan for all the outstanding work in keeping this, helping me keep my sanity and also keeping this all running along, and all the department heads and the staff that did all the work in putting together this budget. We're not at the finish line yet. So I know there's a couple department heads that love to ask me, aren't you glad the budget process is over? And it's like, no, I still have 2 more months. Thanks to everyone for all the work and putting into this. I know there's a lot of difficult decisions. There's a lot of moving numbers here. And thank you with being patient with us as we speak in our budget language and trying to translate the best we can.
And thank you, Ken.
Yeah, and
Yes.
thank you, Ken.
Thank you. All right, let's adjourn.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dory.
Thank you for accommodating me.
Thank you,
Thanks, Doreen.
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 Great questions.